to deliver. This is a high-stakes speech. This is a speech that people from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean are going to be paying attention to, given a few things right now, given the tensions that we talked about between the U.S. and United Kingdom over the war in the Middle East, over the fact that the heat was turned up for weeks because U.S. President Donald Trump was essentially berating the United Kingdom for not getting more involved with the war. So King Charles will be before Congress very shortly to address that. We know that will be the theme of his address. He's going to talk about unity. He's going to talk about the fact that, yes, there are differences, but also a unity, a shared history that he will reinforce. And we heard that as well, Andrew, earlier in the day from U.S. President Donald Trump when he welcomed the royal couple to the White House this morning. He talked about those shared values too, saying that we share the same root, we speak the same language, we hold the same values, and together our warriors have defended the same civilization under twin banners of red, white and blue. So publicly, we are getting that theme of unity. Lawmakers, especially in the UK, are hoping that this visit from King Charles, this speech from King Charles, will be able to smooth over some of these high tensions between the two countries. And so we'll be listening for indications of that from the King's speech on the U.S. Capitol today. And also we'll be listening for the fact that there's been a call for King Charles to acknowledge in some way the Epstein survivors, Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender, and also linked to the King's brother, the former Prince Andrew, Mountbatten Windsor, who was arrested earlier this year. Police are currently investigating him for potentially, allegedly, sharing confidential documents when he was trade envoy. So there's a lot going on here. A lot of people from different walks of life will be paying attention to this particular speech from the King, Andrew.
And we're just looking, I recognize Howard Lutnick there. This is the President's, the Commerce Secretary. This is the President's cabinet that is walking into this joint session of Congress to hear the King deliver his speech to this joint session, expected to take place in just under 6 minutes from now. I believe that's the U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer there. My television screen is really small, so I'm just straining my eyes to kind of recognize who I recognize, to tell you who I recognize coming in there. So that's who we are seeing. Ed, maybe a question just very quickly on that, on Epstein and Andrew, and any kind of acknowledgement to the survivors. What do you think the chances are of that? I don't know whether in this speech or on this trip.
I think the chances will be quite low. The King and the Queen have publicly emphasized their sympathies with the Epstein victims, in particular at the time of announcing that the titles for the former Prince Andrew would be removed. And that was the right time to express those sympathies. But we have to remember that this is a state visit to emphasize the relations of a nation-to-nation relationship. And therefore, the focus of any public discourse should be on those nation-to-nation relations, past successes, future endeavors together, activities on the international stage as international partners. And so the emphasis should be on those matters and those issues, and not so much on, issues affecting members of the King's personal family. There, are also allegations against a number of people in the U.S. government or those previously affiliated with the U.S. government. And so the King will want to avoid any situation where he could embarrass his hosts. The Epstein topic has been quite sensitive for the president as well. So I think the King will want to avoid that.
I mean, Lisa, let's also talk about security and just what you've observed around you. I mean, this is extraordinary. It's Tuesday on Saturday, there is an alleged assassination attempt against the President of the United States. And here is, well, that's the Vice President and the Speaker. Here is the King Charles, visiting the U.S. President. They were at the White House earlier, speaking outside, having meetings inside. There's a state dinner tonight. What is it like around you, Lisa?
Is heightened and has been heightened as a result of Saturday's shooting. And I should say security was always going to be tight, right? But now even more so. There were talks between the U.S. side and the U.K. side about this over the weekend, and finally deciding that this visit would go ahead. And you know, I can only describe what I can see around me. And so, you know, there are officers on bicycles. There are multiple armored vehicles. We heard a lot of helicopters, too. There's fencing that isn't usually here where the public would be able to get around. Not so much today. And that was even more the case as we got closer to 3 o'clock. We're 4 minutes from 3 o'clock right now. But as we got closer to the King's arrival and to this speech happening, definitely fewer places to be able to move around here on Capitol Hill as a result. And no doubt that is only what we can see, right? There are definitely security elements that we can't see and don't know about for a reason here. So this is, it's locked down on Capitol Hill, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Ed, I was just thinking back to the King's visit to Canada, to Ottawa, the opening of Parliament after Mark Carney and the Liberals won the election a year ago today, actually. The election win was a year ago today. And we did see the Prime Minister and the King kind of, you know, greeting people, milling about. It seemed like a much looser security situation than what we've got here. I don't know whether it would have just been like this anyway, or maybe it would have just been amped up a little bit given what happened on Saturday.
Yeah, you know, I was listening to a podcast recently, and they actually talked about the differences between American-style security and those in the United Kingdom. And American-style security is very visible. They want everyone to know that the security is there, and they want to know that everyone is being protected properly. And I think this goes back to the assassination of President Kennedy, where they want to forestall any additional attempts, as well as more recent assassination attempts on the current U.S. president. They want people to know, hey, don't even try. We have so much security here. Whereas I think the practice in the United Kingdom with respect to security on politicians and on the royal family is a bit more discreet. They want the royal family to be approached, to be seen as approachable. The late Queen often went on walkabouts that were unscheduled. In Ottawa last year, the King and the Queen did go on a unplanned, unscheduled walkabout after they left the Senate chambers. And that's how I was able to shake hands with the King and Queen. And I remember speaking to you after that experience last year. And here, you know, given what's happened on Saturday, there was a public statement from the royal household that, the visit will go ahead with certain modifications. And so we have to see, you know, how much public access there will be to the King and Queen. And I think, you know, given the heightened security, presence, there will probably be not so much a unscheduled walkabout after the Congress visit. That's very unlikely to happen. We'll have to see for sure. But I think, you know, given the recent assassination attempts on this president, and the heightened security, I think there will be less direct access from the public to the King and the Queen.
And then, Lisa, as we look at who is there at this joint session of Congress, what about the president? The president is not there, right? But we expect the president probably to watch the speech.
Andrew, I think it's safe to say Donald Trump will definitely be watching this speech because he said as much this morning when he welcomed the royal couple to the White House, kind of with a bit of an interesting tone. He said, "I will be watching." So he said he will not be attending, and we haven't gotten any indication that is any different. Andrew, I wanted to mention, actually, hearkening back, I know, we talked about Queen Elizabeth II, Charles's mother, addressing Congress in 1991, but I wanted to bring in another one of her visits as well. In 1957, visiting Dwight Eisenhower, the president then, after the divisive and damaging Suez crisis. And that was also a mission to mend UK-US relations. And something she said on that visit stuck out to me. She said, "The respect we have for Britain," this is from the president, "the respect we have for Britain is epitomized in the affection we have for the royal family, who have honored us so much by making this visit to our shores," is what Eisenhower said. And I think that's quite relevant today as well, because the U.S. president does love the monarchy and the royal family. We've seen that time and time again. I think it's been evident in what we've seen of this visit as well. And I think that soft power that Charles wields will be key in trying to bridge that seemingly ever widening gap between the two countries lately. And I think he will allude to that in this speech coming up.
Ed, though, I think what's interesting this time is that there has been such heightened hostility, if you will, from the U.S. president directed at the British Prime Minister, whether it is over NATO, over the UK not assisting more in the war in Iran, Trump's disparaging comments about Afghanistan veterans and also, by extension, Canadian veterans that really upset Prince Harry, really upset a lot of people in Britain and Canada and elsewhere who did fight in that war. It was the only time that Article 5 of NATO was invoked, an attack against one, an attack against all following 9/11. You kind of go down the list. We also, what do you make of the difference with hearing Trump speak so glowingly about the monarch and yet being pretty harsh in his criticism of the British Prime Minister?
We have to remember who is the current U.S. president. His views shifts quickly and publicly. A year and a half ago, when this president was attacking then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he was singing praises on the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. And things have shifted, and things have shifted very quickly. And who knows how the pendulum will swing. But what has been consistent throughout his first presidency for Donald Trump and the current presidency is the president's respect for the monarchy, for the sovereign, for the late Queen Elizabeth II, for the royal family, for the current king. And I think that goes to the very nature of constitutional monarchy being above politics, being above political fray, being perennial, and not being swayed by the current issues of the day. And the monarchy, the British monarchy, and in some way shared with Canada and the Canadian aspects of the Canadian monarchy, is the most recognizable monarchy around the world. And we have to, that's plain fact. The British monarchy might not be as old as the Japanese monarchy or the Danish monarchy, but it is the most internationally recognizable. And anecdotally, every time I visit London for a major royal family event, whether it's a wedding or the coronation or a funeral, the people around me, yes, you see a lot of Australians and Canadians and New Zealanders and British people, obviously, but you always see a number of Americans, a significant number of Americans. And these Americans travel a long way to celebrate the royal family or to commiserate with the royal family. And I think this view is shared among the American political elite as well as the general American public. This feelings of warmth and adoration for the British royal family and for the British monarchy. The United States might be a republic, but I think there are, they secretly wish that the royal family still was their royal family.
And Lisa and Ed, you can weigh in on this as well as we continue to watch. But Trump talked about how his mother had absolutely loved the royal family, Queen Elizabeth, whenever she spoke, whenever there was anything on live television for her to watch. When it came to the Queen, she would watch. And earlier today, she talked about how Donald Trump says she talked about how cute she found young, now King Charles, to be. So the affection is there. It runs deep in the family.
There are deep roots there, right? Personal and otherwise. And so that clearly came out in Trump's speech earlier this morning, Andrew. And I should note that Trump, ahead of this meeting, had given some interviews on this and asked whether he might be able to separate his feelings for, say, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, right? And then those for the royal family, like King Charles. And he said absolutely he would be able to separate them.
Right, let's listen in. Let's watch.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you His Majesty Charles III.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of Congress, representatives of the American people across all states, territories, cities, and communities. I would like, if I may, to take this opportunity to express my particular gratitude to you all for the great honor of addressing this joint meeting of Congress, and on behalf of the Queen and myself, to thank the American people for welcoming us to the United States to mark this semi-quincentennial year of the Declaration of Independence. And for all of that time, for all of that time, our destinies as nations have been interlinked. As Oscar Wilde said, we have really everything in common with America nowadays, except, of course, language. So, ladies and gentlemen, we meet in times of great uncertainty, in times of conflict from Europe to the Middle East, which pose immense challenges for the international community and whose impact is felt in communities the length and breadth of our own countries. We meet too in the aftermath of the incident not far from this great building that sought to harm the leadership of your nation and to foment wider fear and discord. Let me say with unshakable resolve, such acts of violence will never succeed. Whatever our differences, whatever disagreements we may have, we stand united in our commitment to uphold democracy, to protect all our people from harm, and to salute the courage of those who daily risk their lives in the service of our countries. Standing here today, it is hard not to feel the weight of history on my shoulder, because the modern relationship between our two nations and our own peoples spans not merely 250 years, but over 4 centuries. It is extraordinary to think that I am the 19th in our line of sovereigns to study with daily attention the affairs of America. So I come here today with the highest respect for the United States Congress, this citadel of democracy created to represent the voice of all American people to advance sacred rights and freedoms. Speaking in this renowned chamber of debate and deliberation, I cannot help but think of my late mother, Queen Elizabeth, who in 1991 was also afforded this signal honor and similarly spoke under the watchful eye of the Statue of Freedom above us. Today, I am here on this great occasion in the life of our nations to express the highest regard and friendship of the British people to the people of the United States. Now, as you may know, when I address my own Parliament at Westminster, we still follow an age-old tradition and take a Member of Parliament hostage, holding him or her at Buckingham Palace until I am safely returned. These days, we look after our guests rather well, to the point that they often do not want to leave. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, if there were any volunteers for that role here today. As I look back across the centuries, Mr. Speaker, there emerge certain patterns, certain self-evident truths from which we can learn and draw mutual strength. With the spirit of 1776 in our minds, we can perhaps agree that we do not always agree, at least in the first instance. Indeed, the very principle on which your Congress was founded, no taxation without representation, was at once a fundamental disagreement between us and at the same time a shared democratic value which you inherited from us. Ours is a partnership born out of dispute, but no less strong for it. So perhaps in this example, we can discern that our nations are in fact instinctively like-minded, a product of the common democratic, legal, and social traditions in which our governance is rooted to this day. Drawing on these values and traditions, time and again, our two countries have always found ways to come together. And by Jove, Mr. Speaker, when we have found that way to agree, what great change is brought about, not just for the benefit of our peoples, but of all peoples. This, I believe, is the special ingredient in our relationship. As President Trump himself observed during his state visit to Britain last autumn, the bond of kinship and identity between America and the United Kingdom is priceless and eternal. It is irreplaceable and unbreakable. Mr. Speaker, this is by no means my first visit to Washington, D.C., the capital of this great republic. It is, in fact, my 20th visit to the United States and my first as King and head of the Commonwealth. This is a city which symbolizes a period in our shared history, or what Charles Dickens might have called a tale of two Georges. First President, George Washington, and my 5 times great-grandfather, King George III. King George, as you know, never set foot in America, and please rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, I am not here as part of some cunning rearguard action. The Founding Fathers were bold and imaginative rebels with a cause. 250 years ago, or as we say in the United Kingdom, just the other day, they declared independence. By balancing contending forces and drawing strength in diversity, they united 13 disparate colonies to forge a nation on the revolutionary idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They carried with them and carried forward the great inheritance of the British Enlightenment, as well as the ideals which had an even deeper history in English common law and Magna Carta. These roots run deep, and they are still vital. Our Declaration of Rights of 1689 was not only the foundation of our constitutional monarchy, but also provided the source of so many of the principles reiterated, often verbatim, in the American Bill of Rights of 1791. And those roots go even further back in history. The US Supreme Court Historical Society has calculated that Magna Carta is cited in at least 160 Supreme Court cases since 1789, not least as the foundation of the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances. This is the reason why there stands a stone by the River Thames at Runnymede, where Magna Carta was signed in the year 1215. This stone records that an acre of that ancient and historic site was given to the United States of America by the people of the United Kingdom to symbolize our shared resolve in support of liberty and in memory of President John F. Kennedy. Distinguished members of the 119th Congress, it is here in these very halls that this spirit of liberty and the promise of America's founders is present in every session and every vote cast, not by the will of one, but by the deliberation of many, representing the living mosaic of the United States. In both of our countries, it is the very fact of our vibrant, diverse, and free societies that gives us our collective strength, including to support victims of some of the ills that so tragically exist in both our societies today. And, Mr. Speaker, for many here, and for myself, the Christian faith is a firm anchor and daily inspiration that guides us, not only personally, that guides us not only personally, but together as members of our community. Having devoted a large part of my life to interfaith relationships and greater understanding, it is that faith in the triumph of light over darkness which I have found confirmed countless times. Through it, I am inspired by the profound respect that develops as people of different faiths grow in their understanding of each other. It is why, it is my hope, my prayer, that in these turbulent times, working together and with our international partners, we can stem the beating of plowshares into swords. I am mindful that we are still in the season of Easter, the season that most strengthens my hope. It is why I believe with all my heart that the essence of our two nations is a generosity of spirit and a duty to foster compassion, to promote peace, to deepen mutual understanding, and to value all people of all faiths and of none. The alliance that our two nations have built over the centuries, and for which we are profoundly grateful to the American people, is truly unique. And that alliance is part of what Henry Kissinger described as Kennedy's soaring vision of an Atlantic partnership based on twin pillars, Europe and America. That partnership, I believe, Mr. Speaker, is more important today than it has ever been. The first reigning British sovereign to set foot in America was my grandfather, King George VI. He visited in 1939 with my beloved grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. The forces of fascism in Europe were on the march, and sometime before the United States had joined us in the defense of freedom, our shared values prevailed. Today, we find ourselves in a new era, but those values remain. It is an era that is in many ways more volatile and more dangerous than the world to which my late mother spoke in this chamber in 1991. The challenges we face are too great for any one nation to bear alone. But in this unpredictable environment, our alliance cannot rest on past achievements or assume that foundational principles simply endure. As my Prime Minister said last month, ours is an indispensable partnership. We must not disregard everything that has sustained us for the last 80 years. Instead, we must build on it. Renewal today starts with security. The United Kingdom recognizes that the threats we face demand a transformation in British defence. That is why our country, in order to be fit for the future, has committed to the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, during part of which, over 50 years ago, I served with immense pride in the Royal Navy, following in the naval footsteps of my father, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, my grandfather, King George VI, my great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten, and my great-grandfather, King George V. This year, of course, also marks the 25th anniversary of 9/11. This atrocity was a defining moment for America, and your pain and shock were felt around the whole world. During my visit to New York, my wife and I will again pay our respects to the victims, the families, and the bravery shown in the face of terrible loss. We stood with you then, and we stand with you now in solemn remembrance of a day that shall never be forgotten. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time, and the United Nations Security Council was united in the face of terror, we answered the call together, as our people have done so for more than a century, shoulder to shoulder through 2 world wars, the Cold War, Afghanistan, and moments that have defined our shared security. Today, Mr. Speaker, that same unyielding resolve is needed for the defense of Ukraine and her most courageous people. It is needed in order to secure a truly just and lasting peace. From the depths of the Atlantic to the disastrously melting ice caps of the Arctic, the commitment and expertise of the United States Armed Forces and its allies lie at the heart of NATO, pledged to each other's defense, protecting our citizens and interests, keeping North Americans and Europeans safe from our common adversaries. Our defense, intelligence, and security ties are hardwired together through relationships measured not in years, but in decades. Today, thousands of US service personnel, defense officials and their families are stationed in the United Kingdom, as British personnel serve with equal pride across 30 American states. We are building F-35s together, and we have agreed the most ambitious submarine program in history, AUKUS. And we are doing it in partnership with Australia, a country of which I'm also immensely proud to serve as sovereign. We do not embark on these remarkable endeavours together out of sentiment. We do so because they build greater shared resilience for the future, so making our citizens safer for generations to come. Our common ideals were not only crucial for liberty and equality, they are also the foundation of our shared prosperity. The rule of law, the certainty of stable and accessible rules, an independent judiciary resolving disputes and delivering impartial justice. These features created the conditions for centuries of unmatched economic growth in our two countries. This is why our governments are concluding new economic and technology agreements to write the next chapter of our joint prosperity and ensure that British and American ingenuity continues to lead the world. Our nations are combining talent and resources in the technologies of tomorrow. Our new partnerships in nuclear fusion and quantum computing and in AI and drug discovery, holding the promise of saving countless lives. More broadly, we celebrate the $430 billion in annual trade that continues to grow, the $1.7 trillion in mutual investment that fuels that innovation, and the millions of jobs on both sides of the Atlantic, supported across both economies. These are strong foundations on which to continue to build for generations yet unborn. Our ties in education, research, and cultural exchange empower citizens and future leaders of both countries. The Marshall Scholarship, named after the great General George Marshall, and the association of which I am so proud to be patron, are emblematic of the connection between our two countries. Since its founding, more than 2,300 scholarships have been awarded, opening doors for Americans from all walks of life to study at the United Kingdom's leading universities. So as we look toward the next 250 years, we must also reflect on our shared responsibility to safeguard nature, our most precious and irreplaceable asset. Millennia before our nations existed, before any border drawn, the mountains of Scotland and Appalachia were one, a single continuous range forged in the ancient collision of continents. The natural wonders of the United States of America are indeed a unique asset, and generations of Americans have risen to this calling. Indigenous, political and civic leaders, people in rural communities and cities alike, have all helped to protect and nurture what President Theodore Roosevelt called the glorious heritage of this land's extraordinary natural splendor, on which so much of its prosperity has always depended. Yet, even as we celebrate the beauty that surrounds us, our generation must decide how to address the collapse of critical natural systems, which threatens far more than the harmony and essential diversity of nature. We ignore at our peril the fact that these natural systems, in other words, nature's own economy, provide the foundation for our prosperity and our national security. The story of the United Kingdom and the United States is at its heart a story of reconciliation, renewal, and remarkable partnership. From the bitter divisions of 250 years ago, we forged a friendship that has grown into one of the most consequential alliances in human history. I pray with all my heart that our alliance will continue to defend our shared values with our partners in Europe and the Commonwealth and across the world. And that we ignore the clarion calls to become ever more inward-looking. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, America's words carry weight and meaning, as they have since independence. The actions of this great nation matter even more. President Lincoln understood this so well with his reflection in the magisterial Gettysburg Address, that the world may little note what we say, but will never forget what we do. And so to the United States of America, on your 250th birthday, let our two countries rededicate ourselves to each other in the selfless service of our peoples and of all the peoples of the world. God bless the United States, and God bless the United Kingdom.
King Charles speaking to a joint session of the U.S. Congress, talking about the 250 years of shared links. Quickly in this speech, we heard the King make reference to the shooting that took place just a couple of days ago at the Washington Hilton, saying such acts of violence will never succeed. He spoke about that sometimes we can agree that we don't always agree, but this is a partnership that is born out of a dispute, but stronger for it. And he quoted Donald Trump, who spoke in the United Kingdom last fall, talking about the relationship as being priceless and eternal, irreplaceable and unbreakable. He also talked about how he championed the idea that executive power is subject to checks and balances. He talked about his Christian faith, but that that people should be forging a future of compassion, peace, and value people of all faiths and of none. He talked about the indispensable partnership between the U.S. and the UK, saying as his prime minister, referring to Keir Starmer, said, "We can't dispense of it, we must build on it." He also spoke about NATO and
the joint meeting of the two houses now dissolved. The House will continue in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
And he said that after 9/11, this was a defining moment for the United States. We stood with you then, and we stand with you now. And he made a comment about NATO, saying that that same unyielding resolve that took place after 9/11 is needed for the defense of Ukraine and her most courageous people. He also talked about the importance of safeguarding nature, our most precious asset. Let's bring in the CBC's Lisa Shing in Washington and royal commentator Ed Wang in Vancouver. Lisa, your key takeaways from what we heard there from King Charles.
Absolutely, Andrew. A lot stood out to me. The references to technology, those cultural exchanges, right? Intelligence sharing that has been a stronghold of the bilateral relationship for a long time. That passion for environmental conservation, which has been a passion of the king for a while. There were moments of levity too, referencing rebel without a cause, that referring to the founding fathers, that got a laugh out of the crowd, and referring to the fact that 200 years ago was just the other day in British time, right? Interestingly, he did quote Starmer, quoting Trump as well, but quoting UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer in this speech. I think a very deliberate choice, considering the tensions between the two countries, and a quote that speaks to that partnership between them, saying we must not disregard everything that has sustained us for the last 80 years. Instead, we must build on it. And the nod to NATO, because considering all of these tensions, Trump had threatened to pull support for the NATO alliance too. And so the king underlying the importance and how crucial NATO is as well. And the one quote that stood out to me the most about the differences, as well as that strategic friendship, that strategic bond between the two countries, was at the very end of the speech, where the king says he prayed with all his heart that the alliance will continue to defend their shared values with our partners in Europe and the Commonwealth and across the world, and that we ignore the clarion calls to become even more inward-looking. And it's the inward-looking that stood out to me, because in 1991, when his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, addressed Congress in this very place that the king is at right now, had something similar in her speech. She was here after the Gulf War to reinforce that relationship between the two countries too, and she said that the best progress is made when Europeans and Americans act in concert. We must not allow ourselves to be enticed into a form of continental insularity. So interestingly, more than 30 years later, the same messages that follow. And I know we were talking about earlier whether or not there would be an acknowledgement of the Jeffrey Epstein survivors who had called for a meeting, written a letter to the king asking for a meeting. And there was a nod, I thought, in this speech to that, in that he said, it is the very fact of our vibrant, diverse, and free societies that gives us our collective strength, including to support victims of some of the ills that so tragically exist in both our societies today. So a somewhat subtle nod to that, but I believe it's a nod nonetheless, which is saying something, considering that the king doesn't usually wade into some of these issues publicly.
That's an astute observation on your part. Lisa, I was also listening to that and wondering if that was maybe an indirect reference. Ed, your main takeaways from this speech. First of all, what did you think of this speech?
Well, the king, you have to give it to him. He's a very eloquent orator and a very sophisticated speechwriter. the king he takes the first drafts of all of his public speeches. And this was definitely aimed at satisfying and targeting the entire spectrum of the American polity and the American political system. There was three main audiences, I think, for his speech: the U.S. president himself, Donald Trump, both sides of the very divided political spectrum of the left and the right, the Republican and the Democrats, as well the American society generally. And he gave olive branches and targets to each and every one of those audiences, focusing on things that are near and dear to their hearts. For those in the American legislative branch who want to counter executive overreach, he emphasized, as your colleague earlier mentioned, that the checks and balances on the executive power and how it was deeply rooted in Magna Carta. With respect to olive branches to Donald Trump, he mentioned how much the United Kingdom has increased its defense spending, the largest increase since the end of the Cold War, and also emphasized his own connections to the armed forces and those of his ancestors, being his involvement in the Royal Navy, and the fact that his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and his great-uncle had all served in the Royal Navy of the United Kingdom. And with an emphasis of reaching out to the American public, he mentioned that Americans, their decisions have significant weight and effect on the globe and the entire world. And their decisions and their actions mean a lot and have meant a lot since the last century, and emphasize all the shared responsibilities between the United Kingdom and the United States, and that their actions must be geared towards not just for the greater good of their own peoples, but for the greater good of all peoples around the world, because of the leadership role that the United States has and of Americans have in general. I think this was such an excellent speech, and I'm so proud that this monarch, is also my sovereign and my king, and is such a leading international figure on the world stage.
Just very quickly, a mention of the Commonwealth and a very strong support of NATO in terms of NATO's role in Ukraine. Just a comment on that, Ed?
Yeah, and I think the king, I think, can get a little bit closer to lines in the sand that other international figures or politicians might be afraid of approaching in order to avoid antagonizing President Trump. The king also is aware of how much affection that this president has for him and for the royal family, and I think he is willing to take just a little bit extra step to convey a very subtle message from a position of authority, from a position of power, to emphasize what the king believes is the right thing to do. Supporting Ukraine, supporting the environment, supporting multilateral institutions and international organizations, supporting multi-faith and interfaith relations. The king is the supreme governor of the Church of England and the defender of the faith in the United Kingdom, but he emphasized that he has supported interfaith relations. And that was very targeted at the United States as well. Americans are a very religious group of peoples, and given the size of the population and the diversity of the country, there are now a growing divide between between various religious factions in the United States as well.
All right, Ed, thank you. Ed Wang, our royal commentator in Vancouver, and the CBC's Lisa Shing in Washington.